The general sat frozen for a moment as the words Titan II seemed to hang in the air around him, his mind racing back to days long buried when codes and operations were spoken in whispers and secrecy had been the only shield he had known. He glanced at the man across from him, trying to read a face that had seen more than it should have seen, lines etched deep around his eyes and a calmness that was almost unsettling. The general shifted in his chair as if movement could anchor him back in the ordinary world. But he knew he had crossed into something extraordinary, something dangerous and alive. The man continued to speak softly, his voice low, almost a hum, as he recounted fragments of missions and exercises that had never existed in any official record. The general remembered the drills, the files, the briefings he had once attended, but the details this man spoke of were different, older and more secret, more potent than anything on the books. The general tried to focus on the details. The mention of Titan II was more than a code name. It was a key. It unlocked memories he had locked away with effort and fear. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. The world had moved on. But some things never truly ended, and the general now knew he was standing at the edge of one of those endings, or perhaps one of those beginnings. The veteran spoke of a device hidden in plain sight and a chain of events set in motion. Decades ago, the general tried to suppress the shiver that ran down his spine, but he could not. He remembered the long nights in secure rooms, the sounds of typing and whispers, the maps spread across tables, the models, the simulations, the people who had vanished without explanation. The general had thought those were shadows of memory, but the man across from him brought them back into sharp relief. He mentioned names the general had thought were forgotten and operations that had been scrubbed from existence. The words Titan II again repeated. And this time the general could almost hear it as a hum vibrating in the back of his skull, as if the code itself was alive and aware. The cafe around them seemed to fade into nothing, the chatter of other patrons, the clinking of cups. The scent of coffee all disappeared from his consciousness. All that remained was the man and the memory. The general could feel the old instincts kicking in, the ones that had served him well when the world was simpler, and yet far more dangerous. The veteran spoke of communications that were untraceable, of signals that could bypass the most secure networks of the government, of men who moved in the shadows and would act without hesitation. The general leaned forward almost involuntarily and asked a question before he could stop himself. He asked what Titan II really was. The man smiled slightly as if he had been expecting the question, and began a story that spanned decades, a story of innovation and betrayal, of science and power, and men who had walked a line between hero and villain that few could even comprehend. The general listened intently, his training and experience merging with a sense of disbelief and fear. He had always known that the world was bigger than the maps and reports that the public saw, but hearing it now in a quiet cafe across from a stranger who was not really a stranger felt like a plunge into an abyss with no bottom. The veteran told him about the genesis of the project, how it had started, in secrecy with the collaboration of unlikely allies and the secrecy that had grown into a fortress of shadows. Every detail mattered. The general noted silently the locations, the code words, the references to people who had vanished or had been. Silence, the air between them, seemed to thrum with urgency, and the general knew that he could not leave this conversation without understanding more. The veteran spoke of tests that had been conducted in isolated facilities, of a signal that could change the balance of power. The general felt the memory of classified files that had crossed his desk all those years ago, now recontextualized and alive with new meaning. The general tried to recall everything he had been taught, to forget everything he had buried for the sake of his own peace. But now the past had come to claim him, and he could not look away. He asked questions that the veteran answered with a calmness that was almost eerie. The way he spoke gave the impression that the story had been rehearsed for decades, that every pause, every word had been placed with precision. The general realized that he was no longer sitting in a cafe. He was standing on the edge of something monumental, a revelation that could change the course of nations. The veteran leaned closer and whispered hints of the locations of devices of men who still acted in the shadows of governments and of a chain of events that could be triggered with the right knowledge. The general felt a cold sweat running down his spine. The world he had known had been an illusion, and now he was facing the machinery behind the curtain. Every instinct told him to leave, to walk out, and forget this meeting. But he could not. He had lived through too much to ignore. The signs he recognized, the discipline of the veteran, the subtle gestures, the coded language, the references hidden in casual conversation, everything spoke of authenticity and danger. The general leaned back and tried to steady himself. He remembered, his own hand shaking over documents that had held the fate of thousands. The feeling returned now, as if he had been transported back to a time when every decision carried weight beyond comprehension. The veteran continued recounting fragments of missions and secret gatherings. The general realized that Titan II was not a weapon. In the traditional sense, it was a network, a signal, a presence embedded deep in systems that should have been secure. It was something that had been waiting for the right moment and the right people to awaken it. The general felt a chill run through him at the realization that he had just been handed the keys to something that could not be contained if misused. The man spoke of communications that could not be intercepted, and of people who had waited for decades to move unseen, and yet everything he said felt inevitable. The general tried to absorb the details. He recalled old safe houses, old contacts, old missions that had never made sense until now he could see the threads connecting decades of secrecy. The veteran spoke of a time when the world had balanced on the edge of oblivion and of how Titan II had been the fulcrum that kept it from tipping. He could feel the weight of the names, the places, the operations, all coalescing into a pattern that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The general realized that his life had led to this conversation, that every training, every mission, every buried memory had prepared him for this moment. Time seemed to distort around them, minutes stretched into hours, and yet no one else noticed the intensity of the conversation. The general realized he was not just listening, he was being tested. His reactions, his understanding, his judgment, every small gesture being noted by the veteran, who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He mentioned a hidden location, a facility long thought abandoned, and the general felt a spark of recognition, a memory of a locked door and a forgotten code. The pieces were clicking together, and he could see the outline of the operation as if he had been given a map written in invisible ink. The veteran spoke of allies in unexpected places, of men and women who had acted without acknowledgement, of governments, of secrets passed down generations, and of signals waiting to be activated. The general felt the pulse of history moving beneath his feet. The quiet cafe had transformed into a nexus of knowledge and danger. He wanted to speak. He wanted to ask questions, but he knew the answers would not be simple. The veteran was not just a messenger. He was a keyholder, a guide, and perhaps a guardian of something far greater than either of them. The general remembered his own career. The difficult choices, the classified orders, the sacrifices of those who had served under him. He could see the stakes of Titan II in a way he had never seen before. Every word the veteran spoke painted a picture of power that could be wielded and destroyed in equal measure. The general felt the thrill of fear and responsibility coursing through him. He knew he could not simply walk away. The past had found him, and it demanded attention, it demanded action, it demanded understanding. He recalled the long nights in dimly lit rooms, the maps spread across tables, the discussions that had seemed theoretical, but now were frighteningly real. The general could see the connections between his own history and the story unfolding before him. The veteran spoke of men who had vanished, and reappeared in new forms of authority of signals that could not be traced of operations that existed only in whispers. The general could feel the weight of understanding settling over him, a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He was on the edge of something enormous, a revelation that had been waiting decades for the right listener. The veteran shifted slightly, lowering his voice as if to impart the gravity of what was coming. He spoke of a trigger, a sequence, a series of events that would bring Titan II into full operation. The general felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that knowledge alone was dangerous. The wrong word, the wrong move could activate forces beyond comprehension. He tried to memorize everything, every detail, every nuance, every warning embedded in the conversation. He knew that the world outside the cafe had no idea of what was about to resurface, and that his role would be pivotal. The general felt the weight of responsibility settling. Like a physical burden on his shoulders, he remembered the people he had trusted, the operations he had led, the lives that had been changed by orders he had given, and he realized that he was once again at the center of a decision that could alter the course of history. The veteran smiled slightly and spoke of patience, of timing, of understanding the signal. The general nodded silently, understanding that he was being inducted into a secret he could never discuss, and that the past he thought he had left behind had returned fully alive. Hours seemed to pass in silence, broken only by fragments of conversation and hints of operations. The general absorbed every detail he could. The veteran spoke, in patterns he recognized in training and debriefs, in missions that had tested him to his limits. The words Titan II repeated like a mantra, a reminder that the operation was both real and imminent. The general felt a cold determination building. Within him, he knew that leaving this cafe would not end the story, that the moment had changed him, and the veteran had given him a glimpse into a world that existed just beyond the veil of normal perception. The general looked at the veteran and understood that the man was not a threat, but a guide, a keeper of history, a person who had been waiting for him to remember and to act. The veteran mentioned a sequence of locations, of signals, and of men who had waited decades for orders. The general felt a sense of inevitability. The conversation was a bridge between past and future, a convergence of memory and destiny. He knew he could not ignore it, that he could not walk away from the gravity of what Titan II represented. The air between them seemed to pulse with expectation and fear, and the general understood that the quiet cafe was the threshold of something monumental. The veteran finally leaned back and let silence fill the space between them. The general felt the tension of anticipation in every fiber of his being. He knew that the next steps would define not just his life, but the lives of countless others. He tried to breathe normally to mask the intensity of understanding that had overtaken him. The veteran simply watched him as if to gauge whether the past and present had aligned in his mind. The general knew that everything had shifted. The quiet conversation had become a revelation. The words Titan II were no longer just a code. They were a summons, a call to awareness and responsibility that could not be ignored. The general stepped out of the cafe into the cool evening air, his mind still buzzing with fragments of conversations and cryptic references. He could feel the weight of Titan II pressing in on him. Like a living presence, he walked slowly down the empty street. Each step echoing in the silence the veteran had left behind, an invisible trail of urgency and secrets. The general knew he could not go back to ordinary life. The world he had known had shifted, and now every shadow, every sound felt like it held significance. He turned a corner and saw a black sedan idling with the engine running. The presence of the car made his pulse quicken. The general hesitated for a moment, considering retreat. but something in him compelled him to move forward as if some invisible tether connected him to the unfolding events. He approached the vehicle, and a man in a dark coat stepped out without speaking and gestured for him to enter the back seat. The general obeyed instinctively, knowing that resistance was meaningless. The doors closed behind him, sealing him inside a compartment of uncertainty and tension. Inside the car, the man finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "Your presence has been noted." The general asked by whom, and the man answered. "The Pentagon has been monitoring signals for decades, signals linked to Titan II." Every word hung in the air, and the general felt a chill ripple down his spine. He realized that the casual mention in the cafe had triggered a chain reaction far beyond what he could have imagined. The conversation had not been private. It had been observed. It had been recorded and analyzed, and now the wheels were turning faster than he could comprehend. The car moved smoothly through darkened streets. The general tried to piece together what he had learned. The fragments of the veteran's stories, the hidden locations, the signals and sequences he had barely understood. He remembered classified briefings from years ago, files that had seemed innocuous at the time, and he could see now that they were pieces of a much larger puzzle. Titan II was not just a project. It was a network, a system, a presence waiting for activation. The general felt a surge of fear and responsibility, knowing that knowledge alone was dangerous. He tried to recall every detail the veteran had mentioned, names, dates, locations, and the peculiar emphasis on timing. His mind raced as the car glided silently through the city. He felt as though he was moving through a shadow world, a parallel reality layered over the one he thought he knew. The man driving said little, but the general could sense that he was not alone. That eyes unseen were tracking every movement, every heartbeat of everyone involved in the resurgence of Titan II. The general felt trapped between past and future, between action and inaction. The car stopped at a nondescript building. The man gestured for him to follow, and they entered a dimly lit corridor lined with panels of blinking lights and screens displaying streams of data. The general felt a surge of recognition and fear. This was not a civilian operation. This was a command center, a hub of observation and control linked directly to the highest levels of government. He realized that the veteran had been right, that Titan II had never been dormant. It had been waiting for a signal, and now the general was part of the system. Inside the room, men and women worked in tense silence, their faces illuminated by screens displaying code and live feeds. The general recognized the protocols he had once overseen in his own service. The hum of servers and the blinking lights were like a heartbeat of the project itself, a living entity. Breathing beneath the surface of normal life, the man who had led him in said, "Watch closely," and the general saw screens flicker, showing data that made no sense at first, names, codes, locations moving like a dance of shadows. He realized this was a map of operations that had never existed in official memory. A voice interrupted the general's thoughts, a woman speaking over a comm system. "We have a signal, we need confirmation." The general recognized the urgency in her tone. It was not fear, it was the weight of knowledge. The man beside him spoke quietly. "Every move matters now. We are on the verge of activation." The general felt a chill. The words of the veteran echoed in his mind, sequences, signals, triggers, timing. Every word he had heard in the cafe was manifesting before him. In real time, he was standing at the center of something monumental, a revival of a network that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. The general moved closer to one of the console's screens displayed. A sequence he recognized, a chain of signals interlaced with codes he had only glimpsed in classified files years ago. The hum of the system seemed almost alive. Vibrating beneath his fingertips, he felt the magnitude of responsibility pressing down. He could see that one wrong input, one careless glance could trigger events beyond comprehension. The man beside him said, "Remember everything you know. You are now part of the sequence." The general nodded, understanding that his past training, his buried knowledge, his instinctive judgment were now vital. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The general absorbed every fragment of data, every blinking light, every whispered conversation. A sense of inevitability grew within him. He realized that Titan II was not merely a tool. It was a sentient presence shaped by decades of secrecy. It was a living network capable of influence and response, and he understood for the first time that the veteran had not just been a messenger, he had been a gatekeeper, a guide to prepare him for the moment. The general felt the pulse of history moving beneath his feet. He was standing at a threshold between what had been forgotten and what must be remembered. A sudden alert flashed across one of the screens, a warning code. The general recognized it instinctively, his heart quickened. The system was responding to an external signal activation imminent. The man beside him said, "Stay calm." The general realized that the words were as much instruction as reassurance. The room around him seemed to fade, the hum of servers, the blinking lights, the quiet tension became a single, overwhelming presence. He felt the convergence of time and memory, the past decades and present moment colliding into clarity. And fear he was no longer merely a retired officer. He was a custodian of a secret far greater than he had imagined. The general stepped closer to the console, and his fingers hovered over controls. He remembered the veteran's instructions, the hidden locations, the sequence of triggers, every detail, now vital. Every memory previously ignored, now essential. He began inputting commands instinctively. The system responded as if recognizing his authority, as if acknowledging that he had been chosen. For this moment, the hum intensified. The screens glowed brighter, codes streamed in rapid succession, and the general felt the enormity of his actions pressing upon him. A voice came over the comm system, an alert from the Pentagon confirmation of recognition. The general felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that the casual encounter in the cafe had triggered a cascade of events reaching the highest levels of power. The veteran's words echoed again. Titan II, a name, a code, a presence. Now fully alive in the minds and systems of those who had maintained it in secrecy, the general understood that his life and the lives of countless others had been irrevocably changed. He had become the nexus point between hidden past and imminent future. The general felt a deep sense of focus, clarity, and fear. The system responded to his every movement, signals, activating sequences, responding to timing. The room seemed to hum with awareness. It was as if Titan,